you're still using 4x12 or 5x5 for every lift. Even if you aren't, you still don't understand rep ranges and when to use what. I used to think it mattered like crazy. I would avoid anything below 6 reps because it developed too much strength, but I understand it now. All of it was Chinese propaganda. Here's what it really boils down to. There is technically no difference in muscle growth between rep ranges from 5 to 30 reps. The differences depend on various other factors of your lifts, the total weight, how technical it is, and the resistance profile. Based on these, I'll give you default rep ranges to use for every lift. Then I'll also show you how to select new rep ranges to continue growth based on previous ones, plus additional advice. Let's get into it. Alright, I'm not going to waste any of your time. Here are the default rep ranges. Explanation comes after. For every isolation movement, movements where you are only focusing on a specific muscle, by default I will use either 8 to 10 or 8 to 12. You can use from 6 to 8 reps, all the way up to 15 to 20 reps. On raise movements, I wouldn't recommend going below 8 to 10 reps though. You should be biased towards higher reps for most isolations anyways, but something like 6 to 8 reps of dumbbell curls is still a valid choice. For any bodyweight lift, I recommend from as low as 5 reps up to 30 reps, given that the weight you will be able to add will usually be limited, so you'll probably need higher reps to compensate. For ab exercises, I recommend 10 to 30 reps for bodyweight lifts and a standard 8 to 10 for machine lifts. Now onto the compound lifting movements. For lower body compounds, anywhere from 4 to 8 reps works. For the free weight squats and deadlifts, I recommend 4 to 6 reps. For more stable machines such as the leg press, I recommend 6 to 8 reps. For presses, anywhere from 5 to 15 reps works great. For horizontal presses and incline presses like the bench press, I recommend 6 to 8 reps. For overhead presses, I recommend 8 to 10 reps. Dumbbell or not doesn't matter. For machine presses, I would be biased towards higher reps like 8 to 10 reps. For pulls, anywhere from 6 to 20 reps works great. For horizontal pulls like rows, I recommend 6 to 8 reps. For machine rows, I recommend 8 to 10 reps. For vertical pulls like pull-ups, I recommend 8 to 12 reps. Another thing to note, the first tier of lifts will be your main movements. So if you start your workout with a bench press, that is your main movement. Main movement should have lower reps prioritized, while the later ones prioritize higher reps. Generally, I favor lower reps for muscle growth, and that is for specific reasons. Alright, next up. So let's take a blank exercise and give it some characteristics. First, its relative heaviness, which is how heavy the lift is compared to other lifts. So something like a deadlift, where you can lift much more weight than a curl, will have a very high relative heaviness. It's not simply the weight that matters here, but how many muscles get activated at once, plus the size of those muscles. More and larger muscles utilized makes the lift more exhaustive, but also directly correlates being able to move heavier loads, which is why I use the weight as the measure for this category. 2. Its technical demands, which is how much precision each rep demands. Machines, for example, will have very low technical demands because you're just locked in place and all you have to do is drive weight. And lastly, its resistance profile, which is how hard the lift is during different parts of it. A lateral raise, for example, will have a resistance profile where it gets harder and harder as the rep progresses, which is known as an ascending resistance profile. The weight gets farther from your shoulder, so it has better leverage against your shoulder muscles. It's an oversimplification, but it works. Most push movements have a descending resistance curve, meaning they're hardest at the bottom, while most pull movements and raises have an ascending curve. Squat and deadlift movements usually have something in the middle. So what do I mean there being technically no difference for growth between rep ranges? Basically, from 5 up to 30 reps, the growth stimulus will be near identical if you train to the same intensity. This means going to failure on 5 reps versus 30 reps will produce the same results, and anything in between as well. There is a caveat though, the intensity has to be identical. Are you really gonna train a failure on 30 reps of deadlifts? You genuinely might just fucking die. Firstly, you should be biased towards lower reps because of metabolic stress. No matter any of the previous factors, more reps equals more local fatigue, resulting in a burning sensation as you lift. This can hinder intensity for no immediate muscle building benefit. That brings us to relative heaviness. The higher this is, the lower we want our rep range to be. This is to account for cardio fatigue, which builds up with more reps and heavier weight. Cardio fatigue will be very apparent in compound movements. If you've ever done 10 plus reps on squats, you'd know what I mean. By lowering the reps, sure we can lift heavier, but the amount of reps we do is far less, making the bout last shorter, meaning less time to rack up cardio fatigue. This is why I recommend 4 to 6 reps for squats and deadlifts. Next is technical demands. The higher this is, the lower we want our rep range to be. I think it's obvious why. The lower the reps, the shorter the set is, allowing less room for error. This is why I recommend lower reps for free weight compounds, but allow higher reps for machine compounds. Last up is a resistance profile. Basically, for any lifts with an ascending curve, the higher we want our rep range to be. This is because they are basically practically impossible to grind out. They get harder as the rep progresses, and if you're already struggling with a certain portion, and then you get to the next portion which is harder, well, what do you think's gonna happen? When you see near failure on bench press, you see these slow ass reps where the person is grinding it out, and then on a row for example, usually you see the weight go halfway up and then shoot back down. So using higher reps on these more awkward lifts will allow you to keep technique better and feel a better degree of intensity. As a bonus, these types of lifts are great for partial reps. If a lift has any other resistance curve, it doesn't affect the rep range I recommend. So going back and applying this, the deadlift has a very high relative heaviness, high technical demands, and a negligible resistance profile. So of course, we opt for the lowest reps I recommend, which is 4 to 6 reps. For a machine bench press, the relative heaviness is moderate with low technical demands and a negligible resistance profile. So I'd recommend a moderate to high rep range like 8 to 10 or 8 to 12. Alright, next up. Now you know how to decide the rep ranges you will default to. This will serve as good baselines, but the baseline is all they will ever be, because if you stick to only a singular rep range for each exercise for your entire training career, you're leaving gains on the table. If you've been running low reps for bench press for months and haven't been able to add much weight in the past few weeks, try switching up the rep range to high reps, running 12 to 15 reps. Run that for a few weeks, and it'll suck at first since you're most likely not used to it, but as you adapt to this new stress and begin making progress in this stress hold, once you switch back to low reps, you should be able to progress higher than you did before. So reps can be a useful tool for varying the training stress and introducing some novelty to keep progression fresh and continuous. High reps are less favorable for muscle growth because of the fatigue factors. However, they can be utilized very well depending on the context. Context matters. Another benefit of utilizing higher reps is work capacity benefits, specifically higher reps with compound lifts. The higher cardio and other fatigue factor demands makes it harder to reach failure, but not impossible. If you can push through and stick with higher reps to a sufficient intensity, with say like squats for example, your ability to manage higher reps for other exercises will go up, and I believe that is a key aspect of fitness most people ignore when focused only on muscle growth. Work capacity is awesome, and will allow you to do more productive work in the gym. Higher volume works amazingly if you can recover from it. Alright, next up. How do I tell a resistance profile for a lift? Run this simple test. For just one session out of your lifting, try pausing at the top and the bottom of each lift for 2 Mississippi. If you find it's insanely hard to hold at the top or near it, you have an ascending resistance profile. If you find it's insanely hard to hold at the bottom, you have a descending resistance curve. Make sure at the bottom you aren't letting the weight rest though. Like pausing at the bottom of a bench press would be very easy if you just let the weight rest on your sternum. If neither are hard to hold, you most likely have a bell resistance curve, where it's hardest somewhere in the middle. An example of this would be a standing bicep curl. What about non-rep ranges? For sets across, the same general rules apply. You can just pick a rep target that is within the recommended rep ranges. So 3 sets of 5 would fall within the 6 to 8 rep range. I don't recommend sets across for any lift other than your main lift though, since you are usually leaving intensity on the table if you keep the reps and weight the exact same for every set. What's wrong with 4 sets? Nothing is inherently wrong with 4 sets. 4x12 is just a common set and rep scheme people use. One issue though is that it limits the exercise variety per session. I believe those last 1 to 2 sets will be less productive than if you were to just use a different lift from a different angle. Plus, if you only had 2 to 3 sets compared to 4 to 5, you'd be more mentally inclined to train harder to make the most of each lift. You can still have a lot of variety while doing 4 sets per lift, but for many, that can result in too much volume pretty fast if you're not careful. Alright. So to recap, if a lift has a higher relative heaviness, bias towards lower reps. If the lift has higher technical demands, bias towards lower reps. And if the lift has an ascending resistance curve, bias towards higher reps. Switch up the rep ranges and break these rules as you progress in your training career after months to continue progression. You don't want to be this black and white zombie who only does very specific rep ranges. Hope you found this helpful. If you want direct help with live tweaking of your program, we can have a chat, man, with the first link in the description. The next video I'd recommend watching is my guide on work capacity. Get that shit up, bro.